Hello, hello. Thank you very, very much for that warm introduction. And I've seen a lot of you today, guys. I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces in this audience, and I'm so grateful and so glad that all of you are here right now to speak on Wodehouse, his craft, his role as a lyricist, and a whole host of other exciting conversations. But before we begin, we have a surprise.
Boston and Baltimore, a chance for stage folks to say hello. Another opening of another show, another job that you hope at last will make your future forget your past. Another pain where the ulcers grow, another opening of another show. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Plum in words and music. Is about to start. You cross your fingers and hold your heart. It's curtain time and away we go. Another opening of another opening of another. You're the top. You're the Colosseum. You're the top. You're the Louvre Museum. You're a melody from a symphony by Strauss. You're a Bendel bonnet, a Shakespeare sonnet, you're Mickey Mouse. You're the Nile, you're the Tower of Pisa, you're the smile on the Mona Lisa. I'm a worthless jack, a total wreck, a flop. But if, baby, I'm the bottom, you're the top. Now, having heard Cole Porter writing both music and lyrics, here's P.G. Wodehouse writing lyrics with Cole Porter for the 1935 London transfer of Anything Goes. You're the top. You're Mahatma Gandhi. You're the top. You're Napoleon Brandy. You're the green and gold and mauve of the old school tie. You're the Brothers Weston. You're Harry Preston. You're custard pie. You're supreme. You're the gates of heaven. You're the cream from the Shire of Devon. I'm just in the way, as the French would say, de trop. But if, baby, I'm the bottom, you're the top. Now here is P.G. Wodehouse, that quintessential Englishman, writing lyrics for the great American composer Jerome Kern for the 1922 hit, The Cabaret Girl. I used to hate the strife and din of London life, but my tastes lately have altered greatly. Yes, long past that days, and now all I say is London, brighter London, save a place for me. You may make a note upon your cuff that I find London good enough. Remove all doubts of my approval. If there's room in London, well, put me anywhere. I prefer the Ritz, but failing that, I'll sleep against a railing. Just so long as it's in London, I don't care. London's foggy, also dirty, and they close it at 12:30, but you'll find me right there. You may spread the information that I found my true vocation, and I found it right here at JLF.
And we're very grateful for witnessing a West End level performance right here at JLF. So thank you so much for bringing that to life. You know, very often literature festivals get a bad rep. We're often told that people don't read anymore, we're often told that the classics aren't important anymore, and we're often told that people only come to listen to Bollywood celebrities. This audience proves all of that wrong. P.G. Wodehouse has been dead a very long time. He's not a Bollywood celebrity yet, although we might have to get you onto that next. And he certainly isn't somebody who did not write classics. So the classics are alive, P.G. Wodehouse is alive, and his life is certainly alive in music as in an audience that is as eager to listen to him now as they were a century ago. So I want to start with you, Hal, and ask you, what made this man tick? What was he doing? How did he grow up and become the man he became?
He was forever curious, Plum, and I'm really here on behalf of my father, who knew him incredibly well and visited him much in the 50s and 60s. But Plum was a very quiet character, but a great observer of humanity. And only to read, I mean, I really got into his novels through his lyrics, curiously. And he always said that all the characters from the Princess Theatre, where this was great laboratory of where Broadway began, all the characters walked off the stage of the Princess Theatre and into his books. And I think he was a very quiet man. He was benign. As Stephen says, it's enough to be benign in your writing. And he was kindly. And he always took trouble talking to my father about, for example, what the rules were for one-day cricket when they went out in the 60s when it began. And then he wanted to know about the law, so he'd ask my father about the law. My father very soon picked up that he had absolutely no interest in what my father was doing. It was all about the plot for the next story, or the character. So he was a lovely man, and tragically I missed him by a few years. He died in 1975, but I adored his Ethel, my great-grandmother, who was a completely different character. But they had a long and loving marriage.
And I want to turn to you, Stephen, and ask, P.G. Wodehouse comes alive in many ways through his own work, but we forget the times that he was writing in. And you've spoken about Wodehouse a fair bit. You've performed Wodehouse, and you've sort of created Jeeves and Wooster. Can you paint a picture for us? What were the times that P.G. Wodehouse was creating in? What was Plum doing at this time, and what made this literature possible?
Most of us, writers included, are made by the age in which we grew up. He grew up at a time of peace and prosperity in the United Kingdom. The Edwardian age was when he was coming into flower. He was born in 1881, and he therefore experienced a little bit of Victorian life. But then when he was leaving school, his parents lost a bit of money, so he couldn't go to university. He worked in a bank. And it was around a time when public entertainment was becoming a huge thing in Britain, in the form not just of music hall and theatre and song, but in the form of sport. It was the golden age of cricket for the United Kingdom. Prince Ranjit Singh came from India and played in England with C.B. Fry, to whom I'm vaguely related, but not nearly enough to have any talent in cricket. And also, it was an age of magazines and newspapers, and he fell into writing while he was working at a bank, and he always said the day he made more money from writing than he did from the bank, he resigned from the bank and became a full-time writer, writing columns and little funny pieces and school stories. He's often been accused, as if it is a terrible thing, of being stuck in his school days, of having the sort of language of a sophisticated schoolboy and being interested in sport. His first novels, his first really great stories were often around cricket, the Mike stories, and then Mike and Smith. His first fantastic character was Smith with a silent P, like ptarmigan and pneumonia, and he was surrounded by characters. He himself was a sort of orphan because his parents were abroad most of the time, so he was brought up, or snooted, as he liked to say, by aunts. And so aunts became a huge figure in his landscape, and some slightly grand houses. I think you would say he was haute bourgeois, not upper class, but high middle class. And he went to houses where there were butlers, of whom he was slightly afraid. And he he had enough wit and insight to see the sort of joke that existed in the class system, how funny it was, how absurd it was, but also that it had some of the best tunes, as it were. It was well dressed, it was charming, it wasn't something that he attacked. He wasn't a satirist exactly, but he was like a schoolboy imitating the grown-ups, and he stayed like that. The remarkable thing about him is he stayed like that kind of forever. He created his world. By the time he had created Jeeves and Wooster, and before that slightly the world of Lord Emsworth and Blandings, I wrote, he died a year, a month, and, 51 years, a month, and 2 days ago, on the Valentine's Day, and 1975, and we did a performance by Hal and others in London to not to celebrate his death, but to commemorate the 50 years. And a plaque was we put a wreath on the plaque of his in Westminster Abbey, and I had written this earlier. Had his only contributions to literature been Lord Emsworth and Blandings Castle, his place in history would have been assured. Had he written of none but Mike and Smith, he'd be cherished today as the best and brightest of our comic authors. If Jeeves and Wooster had been his solitary theme, still he'd be hailed as the master. If he'd given us only Eucridge, or nothing but reflections of the Mulliner family, or a pure diet of golfing stories, Dr. Sir Pelham Grenville Wodehouse would yet be considered immortal. That he gave us all those, and more, is our good fortune, and testament to the most industrious, prolific, and beneficent author ever to have sat down, scratched his head, and banged out a sentence. It's the scratching his head and banging out a sentence that he would like us to remember. He was a professional. Every day he sat at his typewriter, and as he put it, cursed a bit. His language, I think, came to him relatively easily. There are 3 pillars on which a novel, or indeed a play, or any work of written art is based, and they are language, obviously, they are character, again, obviously, and they are plot, story, narrative, however you want to describe it. Some people have a gift for narrative, but not very good at character, and not very good at character. And the language isn't that great. I think you could possibly, with all due respect, because I worship her, as P.G. Wodehouse did, put Agatha Christie into that category. She plotted, as Billy Wilder once said, like an effing angel. But, her characters are a bit cardboard, and her language is not exactly highfalutin or particularly memorable, but it was serviceable. Wodehouse's language was stunning. And he seemed to find that straightforward, how to put language into characters' heads. And his character drawing was extraordinary. The variety of eccentric and remarkable people that he was able to summon out of his mind, astounding. But it was his storytelling that he concentrated on, because he found that the hardest. And as Hal has said, part of his work had been in the theatre. And he said, and this for any writer out there, I think it's about the best advice I've ever heard. He said, imagine every character in your book is the best actor in that genre imaginable. So even if it's only the milkman coming to deliver milk, you have hired a brilliant character actor who plays milkman. And the character who plays the judge is a superb character. And your hero, they're all very expensive actors because they cost a lot. So you're not going to use them in just one scene. You've got to bring them back. And that's how he, and if you read his books, you'll see that. There's no redundant extras in his book. They all have a part to play in the machinery of his stories, which makes it so delightful. And that's a fabulous piece of advice. But he would hang his pieces of paper on the wall. He would type out the first draft and put it on the wall. And then he would read it back. And if he thought the plot needed a lift, he would drop a page. If he thought that it needed, if it was a bit too complicated, he'd raise a page. And he would do this draft after draft after draft until all the pages were lined up. And then he'd send it off to his publishers. My God, he worked. You read it, it seems like it seems like streaming from the angels. The prose is so beautiful and light and easy, the characters such fun, but underneath it all, he was the supreme professional writer of the 20th century, I think you could say.
And in some ways, what's magical about that is that he took from theatre not form, but a way of working and an imagination, that he made these characters come alive. And for so many of us, the characters that stay with us are, of course, Jeeves, but also those who appear but briefly in a novel and leave an indelible mark. And everyone has their own favorite P.G. Wodehouse moment, because the Wodehouse canon is not defined by the perfect character or the most important character, but an array that you sort of sift through and sort of weave and wander amidst. And some stay with you and others don't, and some stay with others and others don't for others as well. But I want to turn to you, Simon, because you've been impolite enough to admit to us that you don't read. Maybe at the end of this literature festival, we're going to change that, but I don't think we might. You chanced upon this remarkable writer in an entirely different avatar, and you were surprised when people told you that he was a famous author. Can you tell us a little more about him as a lyricist?
Sure. It's true. I apologize. I knew, because I grew up very early on with the Broadway musicals, so I knew Anything Goes by Cole Porter and all the big Broadway legendary stars, Ethel Merman. And I was curious when I was trying to find multiple scores of Anything Goes that suddenly there were two different versions. And I came to realize there was the Broadway original that Cole Porter wrote music and lyrics to, and then there was the West End original in London with different lyrics and a different named lyricist, P.G. Wodehouse. And so I knew him as this great lyricist, and then writing with George Gershwin, Jerome Kern, and I knew him from Showboat, a great Oscar Hammerstein masterpiece. And Oscar Hammerstein and Jerome Robbins were writing Showboat, and they had this little piece for this really pivotal scene for this really important character's discovery that they just couldn't write for. And because Jerome Kern had written so much with Plum, he said, we wrote this song together, Plum and I, for another show, and it just didn't ever fit in that show, so we put it in the proverbial trunk of songs unused. And he said, could we use that song in Showboat? Because it really just fits what we want to say in this scene. So Plum very generously agreed they could use Bill, and it became the biggest hit song in Showboat. And
as Wodehouse said, it kept me in tobacco and whiskey for the rest of my life.
There we go. Yeah.
But tell us a little more about what this process of creation looked like. You know, as a lyricist, he was collaborating with perhaps the greatest names of his time. He was really involved on the stage in a way that often gets elided. So who were these people he was working with, and what did that relationship look like?
He really had this huge career before, so maybe that's why I knew him first as the lyricist, because it all happened before he became established as the great novelist. And he was writing with the absolute best of the best that we still know about today, George Gershwin, and his brother Ira. He wrote with Kurt Weill. He wrote the English lyrics for London, for Cole Porter's work. These vastly different musical styles, different rhythm styles, different harmonies, all across this development of the jazz age from sort of the operetta world, very classical, very straightforward harmonies, let's say, and very lyrical line. And you see that he writes a lot of open vowels and lots of long, wonderful lyrics to the music of Jerome Kern. And then he meets George Gershwin, which is very angular, very rhythmic, very percussive. And suddenly there's an awful lot of consonant work comes into the lyrics. And then, almost out of left field, he's writing with Kurt Weill. And to me, he's astonishing because the music styles are so different, and Plum was this amazing lyricist that could adapt his lyric style and yet still sound like himself, but writing with these vastly different people.
And he continues to be performed even today. On which note, shall we have a song?
We shall. I think it's important to point out before I sing this, this song comes a little bit later. It's a George Gershwin song, but incredible to think, two things in my mind, that where the language comes on, is that P.G. Wodehouse read the complete works of Shakespeare every 4 years, which is quite astonishing to think the output he had. And also, he had 5 musicals running simultaneously on Broadway in 1917, which is a staggering feat. And they were Oh Boy, Have a Heart, Leave It to Jane, The Riviera Girl, and Miss 1917. But these 2 little next songs are from 1928 and 1930. The first is with lyrics by Plum. The second is with lyrics by Ira Gershwin, Plum's great friend and collaborator. And you'll hear how the music is rather familiar to both. And the composer for both songs was a very quiet, unassuming chap who sat in the corner and played piano in rehearsals for their show Miss 1917. And his name, George Gershwin. I'm willing to state it is. Don't know who the chap was who first began it, but it's the only thing on this planet. Oh gee, oh joy, the birds are singing. Because why? Because I am in love. Oh gee, oh joy, the bells are ringing. Because why? Because I am in love. And all the while I seem in a dream, I never was so happy. Folks complain I'm insane because I act so sappy. Oh gee, oh joy, the birds are singing. Because why? Because I am in love. I got rhythm, I got music, I got my gal who could ask for anything more. I got daisies in green pastures, I got my gal who could ask for anything more. And all the while I seem in a dream, I never was so happy. Folks complain I'm insane because I act so sappy. Oh gee, oh joy, the birds are singing. Because why? Because why? Because I am in love. Who could ask for anything more?
What a performance!
Thank you.
5 musicals on Broadway simultaneously.
Indeed.
I think one of the things that's very interesting is that they, people like P.G. Wodehouse, not that there are many like him, but people who succeeded in America who were British, Noel Coward is another example, Charlie Chaplin, Stan Laurel, they all had something in common which most British musical performers and light fiction writers at the time did not have. And that was an unbelievably serious view of their work and a work ethic that was suited by America. Because those composers also, and Ira Gershwin too, and that whole generation of Tin Pan Alley, as they're called, composers, worked like stink to create their music, just in the way that I described Wodehouse did. And I think Wodehouse fitted with them because of that. Whereas a lot of British people at that time thought, oh, well, he's writing songs. And that's why there are no great British musicals from that era at all, although they tried to imitate them. I just don't think they simply didn't work hard enough. It's the incredibly hard work. It's bad news for those of us who'd rather believe that a muse or an angel just whispers in our ear and we toss it off in a light and easy way. But it doesn't work like that. And Wodehouse, like Chaplin and Noel Coward, and that they were consummate professionals and hard workers. That's where it all comes from.
I think the other thing to say, Stephen, was they were absolutely driven by producers at that time.
Yes,
it was a time of great change where music hall became musicale. And there were wonderful characters like Florence Ziegfeld, who created, of course, the Ziegfeld Follies. And there's 2 things you need to know about Florence Ziegfeld. First, he was famously rich. And secondly, he was famously mean. And Plum recalls being invited onto Florence Ziegfeld's yacht, where he said the champagne flowed like glue, which I thought was wonderful. There was another wonderful producer called, with the modest name of Abraham Lincoln Erlanger, who was a 4'10" hot-tempered producer famous for his Napoleon complex. And the tiny Erlanger ran the vast 1,700-seat New Amsterdam Theatre and was known as the Tsar of Broadway.
And you know, in some ways, there's a versatility that comes with being a lyricist that allows you to have a signature that transcends forms that you work across. And in many ways, this hard work entailed a sort of grappling with language. And for Plum, language was a place for meaning making.
I think that's right. And I think anybody who reads Wodehouse, as I'm sure many here do, it is what happens to you and in your mind as the words float off the page and into your brain. Something about the timing and the rhythm and the balance of every sentence and the sudden stupidity and the sudden swerve of meaning or the sudden mixing of a metaphor is so blissful in one's head. You almost have to put the book down into your lap and stare at the ceiling with joy. He's one of the very few writers who really makes you gasp at the sheer pleasure of his, his word use. And it doesn't leave you. I've been reading him since I was 11 years old. For my 11th birthday, a godmother gave me Very Good Jeeves, which is a series of short Jeeves stories. And I fell on it like a lion falling on an antelope. I just tore at it. I couldn't believe it. I wanted to eat the words. I suddenly thought, this is what I've been waiting for. In the same way that earlier, if you were at that session, I talked about how Oscar Wilde's language fell on me. I had 3 W's. My World Wide Web was Wodehouse, Wilde, and Evelyn Waugh later on. And they all had some of that ability to use language in such a thrilling way, and it exists now. And I'm sure you'll all have your favorite epithets and phrases from Wodehouse. And how he coined them, I don't know. It's that mixture of the grand, the educated, and what in his day was the street language, Chicago gangster language, jazz language, silly ass aristocratic language, all jumbled together within the same paragraph so beautifully.
And there's a particular way in which this influences why Wodehouse is popular across the world. And P.G. Wodehouse is incredibly popular in India, and we've all wondered why.
Yes.
The boring answer is colonization. I mean, that doesn't cut it. I mean, that's not it, right? Yeah. Because he's not in syllabi, yet he goes off bookshelves like nobody's business. Yeah. And for me, I think what's really remarkable is, one, his ability to sort of be in school throughout his life is very similar to iconic Indian authors like R.K. Lakshman, who wrote Malgudi Days. And this idea of everyday life becoming a treasure trove of stories that we want to recite to each other. Yeah. But also, like we discussed, there being the great Indian family, which resembles in some ways the families that inhabit Wodehouse's life, and the sort of characters.
Matriarchs,
the powerful
aunts.
And the aunts, and everyone coming together.
I think one of the things I would say, and I've sort of thought this over my career in and out of comedy, is that when I started out, we were still living in the remnants of a society that was hierarchical, in which there was authority, and you looked up to your boss in the workplace, and you looked up to your teachers at school, and you even looked up vaguely to politicians and to people of senior rank. And it was a layered hierarchical world, which it had been for hundreds of years. But in our recent time, it has become a network world, not a hierarchical world, a world of nodes of equality. People in offices don't have bosses, they have team leaders. And it's the team that is, everybody's really equal and you can't boss people about. And that's all good. I'm not saying it's a terrible thing. We're all equal and we all should be equal in one way or another. Some people have a little bit more responsibility, but they're not bosses. They don't have, they're not grander than you or greater than you. But the great loss is in comedy, because comedy thrives on people mocking the people above them, and the people below having a good laugh at it, and of enjoying the gap between. And so you have these liminal characters like valets and butlers and maids who are in between, and you have the lower caste, and you have the upper classes, and they're at a kind of war with each other, and always have been in comedy, going all the way back to the great Italian era of Commedia dell'arte. You have Goldoni's play, The Servant of Two Masters, and the Ben Jonson comedies. There's always a clever, clownish or brilliant servant and an idiotic master. And we loved that in the days when we genuinely had masters. We no longer have them. So if you're writing a sitcom now, it's much harder than it was in the 80s when we were doing something like Blackadder, if you know what that is. Because there, Blackadder could have his, oh, thank you. Blackadder could have his head chopped off by the Queen, or he could be sent over the top by a mad general. There was something really at stake because there was authority over him. So you watched his wily behavior, and it was fun, and it was easy to do. When you write a sitcom now, everybody's equal. You've got no one to be afraid of. So you either have to set it in the past, which we did with Blackadder, or you have to find some other way of having it. Because The Office, which is genius comedy, is network comedy, in which there's no boss. And Wodehouse is all about the hierarchies and making fun of them.
And funnily enough, I was watching Blackadder growing up as well, possibly because it was free to air on TV. But I want to turn to you, Hal, and say, there's ways in which the language that Plum uses is also integral to that comedy, because there's a sense of achievement and accomplishment when you can understand the joke. And I still remember being gifted a P.G. Wodehouse set on my 13th birthday and being old enough and mature enough to now understand Wodehouse. What do you think it is about that language? What is this way with words? You've got a facsimile sheet of typewritten paper of similes with it. You haven't carried it onto stage, but...
Yeah.
Oh, you have? Oh, but we have some similes here.
Stephen's got a few gems that he's going to read out. But just to answer your question quickly about the language, I think Plum could not have gone on to become the great British novelist had he not had his experience on Broadway. And it was a time where there was great experiment, but what he did for the American musical, being the first great lyricist with Guy Bolton as the librettist and Jerome Kern as the great composer, they created a new form of musical expression that had evolved from the jazz beats and rhythms from the turn of the century to form a cohesive piece of musical theatre where the dialogue flowed effortlessly into the songs. And I think it was something that caught on, and Plum simply became too successful as a novelist to carry on his career as a lyricist. But I mean it, the characters, as Stephen said, characters are so important. But they walked off that stage and they'd been honed and shaped, and he knew who they were. And they had all that hierarchy as well before we went on to the big blockbuster musicals with Rodgers and Hammerstein and Jerome Kern of Showboat in 1927. But that was a fragile, delicate era that Plum rehearsed everything that he needed to before he really got into his novel writings. So I think that's where the language evolved, the economy of words, and of course what the English, it's a very British thing, I think Noel Coward said, to rhyme, and he loved the rhyme.
And we should mention his hero, who was the hero of all lyricists, right up to Stephen Sondheim and most of the American lyricists, and that was W.S. Gilbert, who was an enormous influence, and he was lucky enough to have met him and knew him a little, and he must never be underestimated as the genius that he was. But anyway, I wrote in another article I wrote about Wodehouse, I wrote about the language, and I said how it works on the page so extraordinarily. So although I'm going to read it out, when you read it yourselves, when you next go and pluck a Wodehouse from the shelves, you'll know what I mean. It is, as Lady Bracknell said about ignorance, it's like a delicate exotic fruit. Touch it and the bloom is gone. But here are some examples. Well, they're the transferred epithets to give them their grand name. So where you put an emotion into something that can't have an emotion. So I lit a rather pleased cigarette is a very typical sort of thing. Or I pronged a moody forkful of eggs and bee. And then there are the hyperbolic similes, the completely overdone, where he talks about Roderick Spode, whom you will know as the appalling fascist leader in the Jeeves and Wooster stories. And he says, Roderick Spode, big chap with a small moustache and the sort of eye that can open an oyster at 60 paces. And here's a bit of dialogue where the fellow, he says, what-ho, I said. What-ho, said Motty. What-ho, what-ho? What ho, what ho, what ho? After that, it seemed rather difficult to go on with the conversation. And then there's the drippy Madeline Bassett, whom you will know from the Jeeves and Wooster stories too. And Bertie remembers, he said, I remember her telling me once that rabbits were the gnomes in attendance to the fairy queen, and that the stars were God's daisy chain. Perfect rot, of course, which they're nothing of the sort. And here are Bertie and Jeeves discussing a young man called Cyril Bassington Bassington. I've never heard of him. Have you heard of him, Jeeves? I am familiar with the name Bassington Bassington, sir. There are 3 branches of the Bassington Bassington family. The Shropshire Bassington Bassingtons, the Hampshire Bassington Bassingtons, and the Kent Bassington Bassingtons. England seems pretty well stocked up with Bassington Bassingtons. Tolerably so, sir. No chance of a sudden shortage, I mean, what? And such things will always work best on the page. There are many, many others that you will all have as favourites. Thank you.
And before we open up for questions from all of the incredible folks here, shall we end with a performance?
I just want to end with my last memory of my great-grandmother, Ethel Wodehouse, who was Plum's widow, and Plum had just died. And we went over for our last visit to see her in Remsenburg, Long Island, where they lived. And she was 98 years old, this amazing lady. And she'd heard that the children were having dinner, which was myself and my 2 siblings. And we were sitting downstairs having burgers in T-shirts and flip-flops. And I looked at the top of the staircase, and there appeared my great-grandmother, aged 98, in a black sequin dress, high-heel shoes, a feather boa, made up to the nines, and in pearls. And she descended the staircase like the last great star of the Ziegfeld Follies. And she walked into where we were, in the sitting room come kitchen. And she outreached her hand. We were agog looking at this vision. And she just stretched her hand out as if to say, ah, the children, into which my father, without skipping a beat, placed a dry martini. So in February 1975, Plum died peacefully and happily with pen in hand, with his aptly named story, Sunset at Blandings, lying upon his lap. And I'm incredibly fortunate and lucky for what he's given me, all the pleasure, and all the pleasure he's given all of us over the years. So we'd like to close with a song written well over 100 years ago by Plum and Jerome Kern, which I think sums up the credo of P.G. Wodehouse and echoes those immortal words of Evelyn Waugh. Plum was the master of my profession, who gave us all the world to live and delight in. Dear old songs forgotten too soon, they had their day and then we threw them away, and without a sigh we would pass them by for some other newer tune. So off to a happier home they flew, where they're always loved and they're always new. It's a land of flowers and April showers, with sunshine in between, with roses blowing and rivers flowing, it rushes growing green, when no one hurries and no one worries, and life runs calm and slow. And I wish someday I could find my way to the land where the good songs go. And I wish someday I could find my way to the land where the good songs go.
Thankfully for us, that land is still here because the good songs are still here. And here's to stories that refuse to die and songs that keep being performed. Thank you so much once again to all of you for being an amazing audience, and to all three of you here on stage for bringing Plum alive in such a magical way on this wonderful Jaipur winter evening. We now have time for questions. So if you raise your hands here in the second row, we've got the first hand up. Always good to have someone very eager.
This question is for Mr. Fry. Having played Jeeves brilliantly, if I may say so, how did it feel to transition from reading P.G. Wodehouse prose to playing him, delivering those crisp, short lines? Because prose is what Jeeves, what we know is through Bertie Wooster's eyes.
Yes, you've put your finger on exactly the problem that Hugh, my friend Hugh Laurie and I, when we were approached by the producer and asked if we would take on the roles of Jeeves and Wooster, we both already were lovers of Wodehouse. I had written to him when I was at school and got a letter back, a typed letter back, and a signed photograph that, of course, I still have, to Stephen Fry, all the best, P.G. Wodehouse. And when we started filming, I had it in my trailer every day, and every day I went into the trailer and I kissed my fingers and put my fingers on the frame before getting into the Jeeves trousers, the striped trousers and the black jacket and so on. It was obviously an extraordinary responsibility, if you like, because we were aware that a lot of people would watch it on television who'd never read any P.G. Wodehouse. And one of the things we were very keen to show is that although, yes, there are silly asses and there are pompous lords and there are butlers, the silliness of Wodehouse is so sophisticated, if that isn't a word that puts you off. It isn't just sort of loopy people going, oh, I say, and they've got heart and soul. Bertie Wooster in particular is a character of enormous decency and warmth and good nature, trying to do his best by his friends and trying to learn from Jeeves. And he's always trying out new quotations from Tennyson. Not quite, sir, no. Oh, well, I'm close, aren't I, Jeeves? Well, yes, indeed, sir. To make sure that was included. It wasn't just an ass, a silly man and a pompous valet, although he's not a valet, he's a gentleman's personal gentleman, as you probably know. So we were keen for that to be the case, and obviously we hope we would at least recreate enough of the language. We could have characters who were wonderful actors that we had playing the different roles, and we tried to make the stories work. And the language, there's a big debate about whether it would be narrated by Bertie, as the Jeeves stories are when you read them. And we decided in the end not to do that, but all of us together thought that that would just detract from trying to make it a pure drama that people could watch. And our biggest hope was that Hal's father would not disapprove as the keeper of the sacred flame, as the inheritor of the Wodehouse, property and estate, if you want to be vulgar about it. He had approved of us to some extent, and we didn't want to let him down, and of course let down the reputation of Wodehouse. So it was a responsibility, but, once you've made the decision, you then have to go for it. And we've been very pleased to think that it has still, given pleasure to new generations, and above all, turned them to the books.
On this third row there, yes.
Sorry, I came in a little late, in case this is already answered. How was P.G. Wodehouse so funny? How was he as a person that translated into so much of humor?
Well, I can say, which will rather surprise you all. He was very unfunny. He never cracked a joke. He was the sweetest man you'd ever meet. And this, I'm going from what my father's told me, and it's important that everyone knows this. And I think what's wonderful is that there's a kindness in his humor. He was a very kind man. And there's a kindness in his humor that sings throughout all his literature, from his songs through all his books. And as I said at the beginning, as Stephen has said, it's enough to be benign, because that's the land he takes us to. We know we're safe. There's no malice, there's no evil. There's just a lot of fun. And he was able to just observe, and I think, we talked about his career on Broadway, he met all these people, and a lot of those old coves at the turn of the century, who were sort of real to some extent, which he wrote about. But no, he was a very, very quiet man, and just unfathomably kind. So that's lovely. That's what I treasure about him.
He could be funny to his friends in letters, using the written word. There's a wonderful letter he wrote to a friend when he was in Hollywood, where he had this ridiculously generous contract to work on screenplays, and he said, visiting Hollywood sets, seeing how films were made, and he said to his friend, after a while, seeing all these sets, when you meet a new person, you can't help looking around them to see if they go all the way round, and mostly they don't. Which is a good remark on the shallowness and superficiality of Hollywood people. So the occasional spiky bit of excellent, and during the Wall Street crash, he made rather a sick joke. The Wall Street crash, when it happened, obviously all kinds of financiers were jumping out of the window because they'd suddenly lost all their money and whatever. And he was in an office building going with a friend to see their lawyer, and someone came out of the lift. He said, "Oh, I didn't think people were taking the elevator these days." So he could be occasionally quite witty.
We are unfortunately completely out of time, but I have one request from Willie. And since he's paying for our dinner tonight, Hal and Simon, I'm going to ask you to sing for your supper with one last song from Plum.
All right.
Okay, this was unexpected, but a great pleasure. But I'm going to sing a song which is Plum writing in a very different vein. And it's, I think, his most gorgeous and beautiful lyric. And I think it's important that everyone hears it, because we've been talking about that Wodehouse magic, that place he takes us to. And he wrote this gorgeous song with Jerome Kern when he was very young. And I'll let the song speak for itself, but it's called My Castle in the Air.
I've a wondrous castle that I've never lived in yet, built so many years ago in days that I forget. It has no stone battlements and great big wooden beams. Its walls and its bars are the dust of the stars, and its gate, the gate of dreams. Come out there for a visit. I've lots of room for friends. And if you ask, where is it? It's where the rainbow ends. It's somewhere there in fairyland, where there's never cloud or care. We'll have joy and laughter, mirth and song, and we'll all be happy as the day is long. In the shelter of my castle in the air. Everything is perfect that you'll find there when you go, just beyond the Milky Way and where the moonbeams glow. No one ever worries there, for everything goes right. The sky's always blue and no lover's untrue, and your life's one long delight. Come out there for a visit. I've lots of room for friends. And if you ask, where is it? It's where the rainbow ends.
It's somewhere there in fairyland where there's never cloud or care. We'll have joy and laughter, mirth and song, and we'll all be happy as the day is long. In the shelter of my castle, in the air.
Ladies and gentlemen, don't you feel that they deserve a standing ovation? Can we truly give them a huge round of applause? What a fantastic closing of day 2 at the Vedanta front lawn of Jaipur Literature Festival Day 2 program. Thank you so much. We can't thank you enough, but we can definitely thank Geo News for presenting this session, this wonderful session. With this, we come to an end of the Day 2 program at the Vedanta front lawn of 2026 edition. One more session in the Durbar Hall. At front lawn, I'm saying. Yeah. And there is one more session going on at the Durbar Hall, which will get over at 7:30, I believe, if I'm not wrong. So you can definitely go. So the interesting session, where does fiction come from? And this conversation is between few amazing speakers and authors. So you must go and attend the same at Durbar Hall, ladies and gentlemen.
We've got all our premier novelists in the Durbar Hall now, not to be missed, with Percival Everett zooming in from LA, and extraordinary Richard Flanagan, Esther Freud, wonderful array of Booker winners. So come and hear it. It's our #1 fiction superstars today. So Durbar Hall now. Thank you so much, everybody. That was just one of our great sessions ever in the whole Jaipur Festival.